Okay, today's lecture is on eliminating forms of be. Let's motivate this lecture by taking a look at a couple of sentences and their revisions. First, the Pilgrims were looking for a new country to be free in. And the revision, the Pilgrims sought freedom in a new country. The revision is much shorter and more direct. Next sentence, Nancy is a perfect example of being brave. And the revision, Nancy exemplifies bravery. Again, much shorter and more direct. Well, what's the difference between these two sentences? We can consider the differences in a few ways, but one useful way to consider the differences is by looking at the use of forms of be. Now, if you're familiar with forms of be, then you'd recognize that here we have were and be as part of the infinitive to be, and were we admit as part of the progressive tense we're looking. Whereas in the revision, we simply have the active verb in the active voice sought. Okay, likewise, in the next example, we have a form of be, and we have another form of be here. It's true, this is in a gerund, but it's still a form of be. And then in the revision, we have the simple and direct and straightforward verb exemplifies. So what this example suggests to us is that we can improve our writing, make it more concise, make it more direct, by looking for forms of be and replacing them with action verbs, particularly action verbs used in the active voice. So we have this principle. Strive to eliminate forms of be using action verbs instead. Principle of writing. Okay, so in order to understand this lesson, it'll be really helpful if you're already comfortable with identifying verbs in the first place, and also comfortable with identifying the forms of be. So you can refer to our other lectures on those topics for that information, but I will simply review the forms of be here. They are am, are, is, was, were, and be, being, and been. Now, let's go to some exercises. The following sentences, I'll use is as a form of the verb to be. Revise the sentences by eliminating the is. And you might want to pause and stop the video in order to take your own shot at revising the sentences. Okay, so first one. Here's our form of be. And we have the sentence, it is a beautiful day and makes all the boys happy. How do we revise out the form of be? Well, the first thing we note is that it really is using too many words to use a whole clause to say it is a beautiful day. There are times when we want to do that, of course, when we want simply to say it is a beautiful day. But in this particular sentence, the real emphasis is on, makes all the boys happy. So we want to keep the focus on makes all the boys happy while noting that it is a beautiful day. And we can do that by simply saying the beautiful day, and then we keep the rest of the sentence as it is. So there's our revision. We haven't substituted another verb for is in this case. We've simply gotten rid of that element of the sentence to make it more concise. All right, next sentence. Again, we have our form of be, is. And in this case, the form of be, so we have Tom's task today is to paint a fence. And again, well, not again, but here we have an infinitive, to paint. Now, an infinitive is not actually a verb. It does not have a subject that is performing it as an action. An infinitive is functioning in every case like another part of speech. But infinitives are very useful to identify in such sentences because they can usually be converted into a verb. And when we're trying to figure out how to revise out forms of be, it's a good idea to keep an eye out for words that can be turned into verbs. So in this case, we want to keep the idea that it's today, and we'll have Tom performing an action. We also want to preserve the idea that we've got a task here. So we'll do that by using a helping verb. And in that case, we'll use the verb must. And then we have our verb, paint. So today, Tom must paint a fence. So we've changed is to paint by converting it into must paint. On to the next one. When Tom first looks around, there is no one to help him. And here's our verb of be, our form of be. And this phrase there is and its associated forms, there are, there was, there were, there could be, there may have been. It's a problematic phrase because it just litters student writing. And one of the problems with this phrase is that it makes writing much less specific. Notice that in this part of the sentence, there is no person performing an action, even though we do have a sense for who should be performing that action. Right? So in revising out the form of be here, we're going to add in to this part of the sentence an appropriate person who's performing an action. Well, the first part of the sentence performs this task well. Right? We have Tom looking around. And then obviously he's the one, who should be doing something in the second part of the sentence. So we'll say he. And since he's looking around, we'll just say he sees no one to help him. So there we go. Instead of there is no one, we say he sees no one. Moving on to the next one. To fool his friends, Tom is aware that he must pretend to enjoy the work. All right, so we have our form of be here, is, and we notice that we have this idea is aware. And we want to use a verb that is basically equivalent to is aware. Well, the first part of the sentence needs no change. To fool his friends. Then we'll say Tom, and then what? Well, knows is equivalent to saying is aware. And then we can keep the rest of the sentence as it is. So Tom knows that he must pretend to enjoy the work. Okay. Another example of Tom's trickery is when he claims that only he may paint the fence. So here's our form of be, is. And we notice that we have a big long chunk of a subject and then this verb is. And that is actually an awkward way to construct a sentence. It's hard for a reader to process all the information in this subject and then to process it along with this linking verb here. So we're going to solve this problem by starting with Tom, right? And we want to keep the idea that this is another example of something. So we'll do that by saying Tom also. And then we need to get in the idea that there's trickery here. So for the action verb, we can say shows trickery. And then the rest of the sentence can remain unchanged. So Tom also shows trickery when he claims that only he may paint the fence. All right, so on to the last one. This trick is successful because Tom uses his imagination. So we have our form of be here, is. This trick is successful. And we want to revise it out. Okay, so what do we do here? Well, we notice that we have the word successful, right? And again, it's helpful to look in the sentence for words that can be converted to verbs. So in this case, what is the logical verb that corresponds to successful? So we say this trick succeeds because Tom uses his imagination. And there we are. Instead of is successful, we've said succeeds. So there are some examples of how you can take particular sentences and revise them to eliminate the verb to be. Now, the question that this brings up, of course, is this some sort of universal rule of writing? Should we always try to write our essays, our letters, our novels without any form of the verb to be? And the answer is, of course not. Skilled writers use be all the time. The difference is that they use it in an appropriate way. So we have this principle of writing here, that we should strive to eliminate forms of be using action verbs instead. But good principles are minor illustrations of more important general principles. And the more important general principles of writing are be concise and write vividly. So let's take a look at the way the rules about be, or the use of be, applies to the example of be concise. So in this first example, concision, we have this sentence here. Vincent is an artist. Now, there's no other shorter way to express that idea, to say that Vincent is an artist. There's no other verb you can use to make that point. And so this is the best way to express that thought. So here the use of be is entirely appropriate. Or let's take a look at this one. She was tired by James Joyce. Again, there's no short and convenient way to express that thought either. It's interesting that James Joyce, who is capable of constructing marvelously complex sentences, probably the most complex and beautiful sentences of the 20th century, well, he was perfectly capable of using a simple one like this if he wanted to make a point about the way a character felt. And this last one, Beauty is Truth by John Keats. Again, we need the form of be in order to make the point. If we just said beauty, truth, for instance, we would sound like, I guess in English, if you're used to English, that would sound fairly barbaric. Okay? But it is interesting to note that beauty is truth. In the place where Keats uses this line, he says, beauty is truth, comma, truth, beauty. Okay? That is all you know on earth and all you need to know. So in the follow-up to beauty is truth, he takes advantage of the fact that in English, once we express a verb, we can leave it out in the next sentence in certain cases, right? So this is like saying truth is beauty, but he's leaving out the is. So Keats, even as he's illustrating the proper use of be, is also in this line of the poem illustrating how to avoid using be when it's appropriate. Okay. Next exception to this principle of striving to eliminate forms of be. Let's take a look at vivid writing. In the central portion of the great North American continent, there lies an arid and repulsive desert, which for many a long year served as a barrier against the advance of civilization. From the Sierra Nevada to Nebraska, and from the Yellowstone River in the north to the Colorado upon the south, is a region of desolation and silence. Nor is nature always in one mood throughout this grim district. It comprises snow-capped and lofty mountains, and dark and gloomy valleys. There are swift-flowing rivers which dash through jagged canyons, and there are enormous plains which in winter are white with snow and in summer are gray with the saline alkali dust. They all preserve, however, the common characteristics of barrenness, inhospitality, and misery. Now, the bold-faced words, of course, show that there are many forms of be in this piece of writing. But that's perfectly fine, because in this piece of writing we have a lot of vivid lines. So there's a lot of details of place: North American continent, the Sierra Nevada, Nebraska, the Yellowstone River, and the Colorado River. Okay? Not only that, but we also have very vivid descriptions of this landscape. It's snow-capped, the mountains are lofty, the valleys are dark and gloomy, jagged canyons, enormous plains, and so on. So when your writing is full of such descriptive passages, you don't really need to worry about having colorless verbs like be in the writing. Notice as well that in this example too, the author takes the opportunity to use more interesting verbs, more colorful verbs, than the verbs to be. All right? So, for instance, instead of saying there is an arid and repulsive desert, he says there lies an arid and repulsive desert, which for many a long year served as, he could have said, was a barrier, but he doesn't. He says served as a barrier. The verb to have can also feel colorless. And instead of saying it has snow-capped and lofty mountains, he says it comprises them. Instead of saying they all have, however, the common characteristics, he says they all preserve the common characteristics. So, once again, in this piece of writing, we have an author who is using forms of be because he can, but also eliminating those verb forms when he can do so without damaging the writing as a whole. So just to sum up the lesson here, in your writing, you should strive to make your writing clearer and more concise. And one technique for doing that is to look to see if you can eliminate forms of be and use action verbs instead. But always let the more general principles guide your writing. And those principles are be concise and write vividly. Thank you.